Well, it's Thursday, March 10th, 2022. I'm Andy Johnson. Good morning. Welcome to the program. This is today's edition of AM Prime. Let's tell you what's going to happen in the next hour and a half or so. We will be talking with Mr. Barry Padaris. He's the Member of Parliament for Princestown. He's also the Shadow Minister for Public Utilities. We want to get back on some of that issue, some of those issues which were discussed 2 nights ago in the conversation with the Prime Minister and the nation. The Minister of Public Utilities was there laying out some updates on what the situation is with the Water and Sewerage Authority. Where are we on that? Because the Minister came in with a kind of a bang, talking about what would happen with WASA, including the fact that they were going to run this program for reconstruction of the organization. We're doing some internal work, trying to make the organization better than it was. And one person, fell on the sword for that, the person who was made executive director after this report was accepted as to what to do. That's Dr. Lennox Seeley. Well, what the situation is now, we want to get at that. And so we will be talking to Mr. Padaris in the second hour of the program, given what the minister has said about staffing and this plan to restructure the organization, what became of it. We're also talking, of course, we'll show you the numbers, what they are with COVID-19 and stuff like that. We have the Newsday poll. We'll tell you what it is. We'll take a look around the region. We'll touch St. Vincent and possibly St. Lucia and other things in the program as we go along. But right now, in our midst, the Prime Minister announced that he had changed the government's position on what to do regarding what we call the Paria fiasco. Instead of this committee, which would have been appointed to get information on it and write a report, in the wake of opposition to that from, not only the opposition, but people in the wider society, the Prime Minister, in that conversation with the people 2 nights ago, he said that the government is going to appoint a commission of inquiry. To what extent that would make any difference as we go forward on this issue? Because we've had many a commission of inquiry into one thing or the other in our history. Certainly in post-independence history, certainly the post-Republican status history, famous among them. You remember the commission of inquiry into the place, the housing community in Mova. What became of that when houses began to just tumble down? What became of that? There was the commission of inquiry, most notably into what transpired on July 27, 1990. And it is from that basis we want to have this discussion with Mr. Avery Sinanan. He's a senior attorney in Trinidad and Tobago. He was one of the leading attorneys supporting the commission then in 2013. And they, among their recommendations, they talked about how to beef up the legislation for the conduct and the establishment of commissions of inquiry in Trinidad and Tobago. No one knows whether that has been taken on board, but we're going to have another commission of inquiry. What will it yield differently from what the committee, which was supposed to have been under Mr. Eugene Tier, or chaired by him, would deliver on this latest tragedy? Mr. Sinanan has agreed to talk with us about that. Good morning, sir. I'm asked to ask you to unmute your mic.
I have done that.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, we're hearing you. Well, good morning once again, and thanks for...
Morning. And thanks for having me.
Yes. All right. So here's my question. My position is I figured that the Prime Minister said, well, it's a good thing he said that and did that. From a lot of perspectives, that instead of going ahead with this committee, my view is that the committee would have met and talked with people. We didn't know what they would discuss. And people don't trust the process. They had these questions about him and so on. You're not going to go there, but that's just part of the opposition to it. But in the face of that, the Prime Minister, he surprised a lot of people by saying, well, okay, you want to, at least this is my summation of it. You want a commission of inquiry? Well, you will get one. And so you have one. My view is that, would it make any difference? I want to start by asking you that, given your experience with these things.
I think it would, because the committee that was initially conceived of to be appointed to investigate the fiasco was really an extension of the executive. It lacked any sort of forensic teeth. Basically, it would have been engaged in a fact-finding measure or exercise And even if they extended it to making recommendations, it all depended on how the government would treat with that or how the executive would treat with that. They certainly could not assign culpability or find any culpability without more, because they were not a judicial body. And if they sought to impugn the characters or the participation of any player in the fiasco, they would be courting a suit and libel.
All right. So you said it would have lacked forensic teeth.
Yes. I think what you have with a commission of inquiry, you have the statutory underpinning, and the number of provisions that are set out in the Commissions of Inquiries Act, Chapter 1901, which gives the commissioners the ability to summon witnesses, to subpoena witnesses, to summon documents, to make findings of fact, to assign culpability, and to go further and make recommendations. Now, I think the pith and gravamen of your or the burden of your complaint, if I may put it that way, is that, well, listen, look, you've had several commissions of inquiry over the years, but nothing really has come out of it. And of course, this is a cost to taxpayers. So is this going to make a difference? Well, it depends on the political, or I should say the executive will, to take the findings and the recommendations, and deal with it in accordance with the recommendations and the report that would be ultimately handed in. The commissioners will do their job, they will discharge their functions and make a faithful report, but then it is the executive to take it and deal with it.
What encouragement we have, given the sort of litany I just laid out earlier, about what has happened with Commission of Inquiry after Commission of Inquiry thus far?
I think you've touched on the point initially in your opening, when you said that, listen, look, we've had a number of commissions of inquiry, and really, at the end of the day, to put it bluntly, you have not got value for money. And I think historically, we have a situation where the executive fails to act on the recommendations made by commissions of inquiry, particularly if it doesn't accord with their political mandate or their political perception of what ought to take place. In other words, it is very easy to appoint a commission of inquiry. That's the easy part. The hard part, or the difficult part, is accepting the recommendations and implementing it.
Yeah.
And you require a certain measure of political will, you require a certain measure of executive understanding, and you require a very basic, you have to adhere to a very basic tenet, and that is to do what is in the best interest of the country.
Yes.
That is the overarching and overriding principle that the government must adopt when they get the report. Do what is in the best interest of the country.
Right. I'm being very probably over cynical about it, but you think that the Prime Minister did that simply to call the opposition's bluff?
Well, I don't understand quite. I don't know exactly how to take that. I mean, that may be one way of looking at it. But on the other hand, I think that he came to the realization that this committee, the perception in some quarters in the country was, well, that was a pickup side, is a FETMAT side that you're taking to play a match after Sunday lunch. So that wasn't going to work. Given the nature and gravity of what took place, I think Trinidad became under the microscope of international, regional, and international players. And certainly, another quarter could be that pressure was brought to bear on the government. Listen, look, we would consider an independent commission of inquiry to be more sanguine and acceptable.
Yeah.
In order to deal with what took place. Because remember that PARIA is dealing in a activity that has international implications. Maybe later on you will want to track investment, foreign investment.
Yes.
And I think that the players would look and see, well, listen, look, you not only owe a duty to ascertain what transpired and why it transpired to the families or to the actual divers who have lost their lives, but rather you owe a duty to those who will come after, maybe next year, year after, in 5 years' time. That once you put that pipeline back into operation, you're going to have to maintain it, and divers are going to have to go again, as I say, in 1 year's time, 2 years' time, or 3 years' time.
Yeah. So he should be given some credit then, in some ways, for satisfying what seems to have been a cry from several quarters. So give him some points for that, right?
Well, yes, I think so. I think he has reflected. He has given it some mature reflection. The reason, of course, that he espoused, I think, if I heard his interview correctly or his conversation correctly, is that the population was so riled up that they would not trust the findings of or the workings of the committee. Well, I think it went a little bit beyond that. I think in the initial stages, a commission of inquiry should have been contemplated, and I think that. I think that, yes, the population was riled up, but they were riled up from the inception. Because this was a traumatic experience for the population. So, yes, to answer your question, yes, I think that he gave it some mature reflection, and he recognized, for whatever reason, or whatever was his motivation or inspiration for doing so, that this committee, as I say, in some quarters, considered a pickup side was not going to be good enough, but we needed an independent commission of inquiry. So yes, give him the credit, give him the points.
Right. Okay. Fine. And I want to come back on the appointment of the commission, how it will work, and so on. What are the advantages? But I don't know to what extent you think the issue about naming people or suggesting that people on that committee that has now been disbanded, pointing fingers and saying who was politically aligned. You think that people have a sense of correctness in making that point, or it's just a part of your argument to defeat the action and the decision to do that? I mean, can fingers, you think, be pointed at Mr. Tier to say that he is too politically aligned? How do we know these things, and should we ask for fuller disclosure on that if we're gonna accuse people of political ties in that kind of way?
Well, let me put it this way. I don't know too much about the individual appointees. The person who was to chair it, I do know him, and I know him to be a very competent young attorney. But with respect to the other members, I don't know them. But I think, to answer your question, I think the opposition did that. The opposition put in the public domain, well, listen, look, this particular member had certain ties with the Minister of Energy and other affiliations that made it, if not, as a matter of fact, certainly gave rise to the perception that this committee was not going to be as independent in terms of its exercise as it ought to have been. And I think the opposition's position may have been vindicated. I saw last night a political analyst come out and say that the opposition leader was justified in raising the query.
Yeah. All right. So come back on the strengths of the Commission of Inquiry. Now, one of the things for me, what about it, is that the proceedings are held in public, and so people can attend, people have access to what transpires, and that is a big plus for it, not so?
Yeah, that is correct. That is correct.
With the way I saw you perform with that Commission of Inquiry into the events leading up to what we experienced on July 27th, 1990, they made some recommendations as to what they saw as the weaknesses in the law regarding commissions of inquiry. One of the things that they talked about was that they didn't have the power to actually subpoena people, if subpoena is the correct term to be used there, to get people to come and testify. You had the situation in which, well, the man at the center of what transpired on that day, the late Yassin Abu Bakr, he had said, he's on record, as he was on record as having said he would welcome it and he will go and say his piece. case, when the time came, he said, well, I just didn't feel to go again. And there was nothing to be done about it.
He did say that if he got a similar stipend that the chairman of the commission was getting, he would come. He did say that. But to answer your question, remember that the Commissions of Inquiries Act, or the Commissions of Inquiry Act, is a piece of legislation that has been with us for many years. It's antiquated. It really needs to be overhauled. And yes, the commission does have power to subpoena people, and it is an offense if you are subpoenaed and you don't attend. But at the same time, the enforcement of the subpoena is an area that is lacking. For example, although it's considered in some quarters that a commission of inquiry has a quasi-judicial function, they can't penalize anybody for not attending. You could bring proceedings under the provisions on a summary conviction. The recalcitrant offender is fined. But to say that you can, for example, imprison him for contempt, the Commission of Inquiry or the commissioners do not have that power. And one of the recommendations made by our commission, the Commission of Inquiry into the 1990 coup, is that perhaps either it be given that power, but there's a little difficulty with that because that could be crossing the boundary of the separation of powers. They're not a judicial body as such. So it could be referred to the High Court. You make out a case, an indictment, and you refer it to the High Court, where the judge who is charged with the responsibility of adjudicating on matters such as these would have the jurisdiction and the power to commit someone who is recalcitrant and from attending, even in the light of receiving a subpoena, to have them committed for contempt.
How is that to be had? How is that to be established?
Well, no. Obviously, you have to amend. You have to amend the Commissions of Inquiry Act, and more than that, I think right now, I think one of the recommendations that you have to look at, whereas the president in his or her own right, as a matter of discretion, once the public welfare is involved, can appoint a commission of inquiry. Invariably, it happens or it occurs on the recommendation or by reference of the prime minister or the government. So you may want to look at that as well to give it a more if I may put it, a more democratic facelift, and say, well, look, if a certain number of members of parliament, for example, not necessarily a majority, but a certain number of the members of parliament vote for a commission of inquiry, then it ought to be appointed. So you don't leave it entirely in the hands of the executive, to do so. You have a wider approach in terms of the appointment of a commission of inquiry.
Yeah, and should some of these things not have come before we attempted to go down this road again to appoint another commission of inquiry?
Well, I would agree with you. I think if the report of the 1990 coup had been acted, I think that report was delivered at least more than 5 years ago.
Yeah.
At least. I can't remember the exact date, but at least more than 5 years ago. It's just on somebody's shelf or some department shelf gathering dust. If they're taking it down and dusted it and taken an incisive approach, they should have done that. They should have made the necessary amendments, as the case may be, in order to give the inquiry a lot more teeth, especially in the light of the fact that how our society is developing, Andy, that more and more you need to have independent organizations and independent entities getting involved and participating in the whole area of governance. In other words, you don't leave it to the executive and the opposition to hammer this out in Parliament.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that one is that at least two of its members were not citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, the chairman and one of the other major members of that, both of them eminent Barbadian jurists.
That is correct. The chairman in particular, Sir David Simmons, he was a former Attorney General, and Chief Justice of
and all of
Barbados,
that,
and I
yes.
think he sat as chairman of the CCJ, the Judicial and Legal Service Commission. And he's well known throughout the Caribbean as an eminent jurist because he sits on a number of arbitrations and so on throughout the region.
Yeah, and among other things,
yes,
I think he
Sir,
was the man.
Sir Richard Cheltenham as well.
Johnny Cheltenham, yes.
Is also an eminent jurist, an eminent attorney.
Yeah.
And yes, the recommendations were there.
Yeah. Given your assignment with that commission, explain how the role of attorneys like yourself is important in putting it together, however long it will take between the Prime Minister's announcements 2 nights ago and when we see it set up. What are the kinds of tasks that are required such that you had performed on that occasion?
Well, the first thing is that I think it is open to the President when she appoints the commissioners to suggest a timeline. I think that should be an interactive decision in the sense that the commissioners will take a look at what are the terms of reference. The terms of reference really determine how long it's going to take. If you have narrow terms of reference, then it will take a shorter time. Obviously, if you have a wider terms of reference, it will take a longer time. The point about it is that you have to strike a balance and between expedition and having a thorough investigation, because at the end of the day, you want this to be a template for future action in terms in that area of national activity. You know, the Paria area, the diving and energy and so on. So to answer your question, having determined or getting an assessment or a guesstimate, as it were, as to how long it will take, then you then have to make an inventory, a list of the persons that you think are the primary players and the secondary players, and you start soliciting their participation. You invite them to come forward, either willingly or you subpoena them. Whatever documents there may be, I don't know if, for example, there is some report done by the contractors or even Paria itself, or even beforehand. You have the history of the pipeline. What transpired with the pipeline 5 years ago when it was under Petrotrin and or wherever.
Yes.
All of that is relevant material. So as an attorney leading the charge, as it were, in terms of unearthing the forensic evidence, so that the commissioners can make an informed decision, you have to get all this relevant material. You harness the relevant material, and you identify the persons who can give viva voce evidence. Now, it may very well be that somebody, John Jones, can come forward later on, and even though you may not identify him, and say, "Listen, look, I know what went on there. You know, I used to work at Petrotrin or Paria. Well, it won't be Paria, but I used to work at Petrotrin and worked on that pipeline 20 years ago,
or Texaco, or whatever."
And I could tell you, I could tell you, and so you invite him to come and give a statement. You have a statement, a working statement, and he gives viva voce evidence. And the commissioners take that on board. He can attend with an attorney. Any witness coming can attend with an attorney. They are examined, they are cross-examined, and the commissioners themselves. You see, this is not really strictly a court of law. So the commissioners themselves can ask questions, pertinent questions. And all of that leads to a very informed decision and an informed report at the end of the day.
All right, we got.
I say that you require the executive will to take it and act on it.
Yeah, well, we got to go. We want to thank you very much, but just in a word, what's the absolute next step from here, from the Prime Minister's announcement?
The appointing of the commissioners.
Yeah,
and I would suggest giving them a timeline. As I say, that would be an interactive decision. You have to see what the terms of reference are, and that would determine the length of time that they may need. And it must be done in a reasonable time.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you are very concerned, and so will the population be, about expedition. But you must remember, for example, in 1972, there was the Bloody Sunday in Ireland.
Yes.
The Commission of Inquiry, the Royal Commission under Lord Saville, was not appointed until 1998. And the actual Commission of Inquiry took 12 years.
Wow.
It took 12 years. Yeah. I'm not suggesting, of course, by any stretch of the imagination that is what is going to happen here.
Yes.
But you know. So, but you have to strike a balance between doing a thorough job and expedition.
All right, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Your Eminence, Mr. Avery Sinanan.
Thank you very much for having me, sir, and have a very good morning.
You too. Thank you very much. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we give you the numbers, we give you the Newsday poll, and much more. Stay with us. This is AM Prime on this Thursday morning.
Catch the playoffs and the finals of the Dream 11 cricket tournament on Friday from 11 a.m. only on WESN Content Capital, your home for cricket.
What's the best way to grab the attention of viewers? Please exercise more patience. You have to be kidding me.
Doing what we do best.
I'll say at the very least it's a conspiracy of laziness against the people.
Join me, Keaton Shaw,
And me, Sean Michael Small, for Talking Point.
weekdays from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m.
We go in depth on the trending issues and engage the most controversial newsmakers.
as we get them to account to the people for their actions.
You can't go to the government with nothing. You can't go to cabinet with an empty hand, with a wish.
I'm glad that we're having this a sober, mature discussion.
In the present situation, I expect a continuation of the chaos.
Join us for the discussion, Mondays to Fridays,
Only on WESN.
the Content Capital.
People really want to know, what about me? Where do I fit?
Yes.
What is in the ride for me in terms of a better Trinidad and Tobago? And I'm pleased to shed some light on that.
The purpose of bail is to ensure your attendance at court. That's it. It is not punitive, it is not rehabilitative.
We, the police officers, we are professional and we are here for whenever the survivor is ready to come forward.
We have the right to private and family life, the right to religious freedoms and beliefs and thoughts and expression. But these rights are not absolute. Certain rights can be limited.
The law is to govern the whole, is for all of us in public.
Join me, Sule A. Joseph, as I delve into the day-to-day psychological issues plaguing our society. We will discuss behaviors that encompass the biological influences, social pressures, and environmental factors that affect how you think, act, and feel. Sight, Thursdays at 11:30 a.m., only on WESN, Content Capital. Catch the playoffs and the finals of the Dream 11 cricket tournament on Friday from 11 a.m. only on WESN Content Capital, your home for cricket.
It may seem like the hardest thing to do right now, but we all need each other to wear a mask, wash our hands, watch our physical distance, and stay at home. We need you safe. Together we can make the difference. Together we can curb the spread of COVID-19. So let's be responsible in our actions. The Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross Society. Mission-based, people-focused, community-driven.
Welcome back to the program. This is the point where we take a look at what the numbers are saying. Amidst this morning, the COVID-19 numbers, new positive cases, totally recovered patients, total active cases as they stand, the death toll, persons in hospitals. Let's see those numbers as we walk them through this morning. They represent what happened up to the end of what the status was up to the end of yesterday, March 9th. So we're March 10th today, but these are the numbers. You've seen them. 105,650, that's the totally recovered patients. 22,059, the total active positive cases in the country. The death toll thus far, 3,669. Now that figure has been slowing. The move on that has been slowing in the paper this morning. You see, there were just 2 deaths yesterday. Not that there's any cause for celebration as such, because it's 2 people who succumbed in the case. That's 2 lives lost. But the fact is that the rate of the increase of that has been reduced significantly. Other numbers, 378. That's the total positive cases reported in the country since we began the counting, which was on March 12, 2020, to yesterday, March 9th. 414 the new positive cases reported in the 24-hour period ending yesterday, and 231 the number of persons in hospitals in what has come to be called the parallel healthcare system. So those are the numbers for COVID-19 on this day, March 10th, 2022. We shift our attention now to the Newsday poll, and the question is, do you think a commission of inquiry is a better option to probe the Paria tragedy? Well, we spent the better part of the last 20-25 minutes talking about that. If you've been listening, you heard Mr. Sinnanan say, well, yes, on a broader scale, for all intents and purposes, but there are some weaknesses, as we discussed. So here are the responses to that. One person says, yes, it will be public and no cover-ups. And that's one of the points we went through in that discussion. Another person says, you TNT clowns are incapable of ever getting to the bottom of anything because you are all drowning in lies, corruption, cover-ups, and self-protection and self-preservation. So why even bother looking into this tragedy, or any other one for that matter, when nobody is to blame, results are already written in stone. Stoops wasting people's time and money. Well, that's cynicism if there ever was one. Another response is, how much years will this investigation take? Will we try to establish that? And the final response, if only politically correct options are acceptable, so say so media. Well, that's the sum total of these responses to that question. What do you make of the decision and the announcement to appoint a commission of inquiry into this tragedy? We move from that to our next guest. He's Mr. Fazil Khan. He's the president of what's called the Joint Consultative Council for the construction sector. And he wrote this letter, which appeared in the Express newspaper 2 days ago. It's headlined, "A Dangerous Precedent by the Government in Closing the EFCL," that's the Education Facilities Company Limited, in a context in which just days before that decision was taken, there were people who were complaining about the fact that they were owed money by this organization. There have been lots of issues concerning its establishment and its functioning. It's led to the point now where the government has decided to close it, and Mr. Khan has written some stuff here saying that there are implications for that. He's agreed to talk with us. He's out of this jurisdiction somewhere where he's 4 hours ahead of us, so he probably was up early and is prepared for a discussion. Good to have you, sir. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, so let's start from where you start there. The headline it says it's a dangerous precedent in the government's decision to close it. Okay, walk us through that as we begin.
Yes, Andy. So we have so many special purpose companies that have essentially been formed to bypass what applied before in terms of the central bank, not the Central Tenders Board.
Yes.
And now we have procurement legislation in place which essentially removes that law. However, we need to be very clear about how these companies were formed. And these companies were formed by the government for, in this case, for particular action to provide services for the Ministry of Education. So contracts were let and goods and services were provided, and now the government has sought to wind up that company without dealing with the debt, even the one that is established by people going to court and getting judgments.
Yes. In the context in which just recently people were complaining about not getting paid, you think this was, well, for a number of reasons, you're suggesting that this was not a proper action. It was not action taken, under the best circumstances, with the best intentions in mind, or with the best interests of people in mind. But you think that there are other steps that should have been taken before that?
Yeah, well, there was ample opportunity for the government to review, and actually things were put in place. So let me take you back from, say, 2016, when the government took over. Now, the elephant in the room I will address. There was an impression and statements made on the government side that maybe all of these claims by contractors were needed to be sorted out. So there were several audits that were done, starting with the EFCL themselves, then with the Ministry of Education, and even sometimes with the Director for the Ministry of Finance. I'm just recalling my memory here. But several companies were asked to supply information, which over the years, and there were several audits that companies who provided services in contract to EFCL were subject to. Even then, there was non-payment. So in 2018, there was a breakfast meeting with the Prime Minister to listen to the complaints of the industry as a whole, the construction industry, and then he sought to establish a committee for the construction industry to look at several things, including what was the large amount that was being placed in the public forum concerning outstanding debt. And there were different numbers being called, and I think the government was quite right to question, well, where is all of this? Is it legitimate? So that committee was then appointed, and they were given, again, all this information that may have already been sent to the various companies. Now, this is not just EFCL, right? This would be any state company that would have owed any contractor or consultant. And that all of that information would have been sent. And so that was a sort of formal relationship that the JCC had with the Prime Minister's office in going through these debts. Now, there was never a culmination of that exercise in terms of an output coming from that office as to what was determined to be the debt that they had counted as certified. So in between all of that time, now that was 2018, people were doing what they could do in terms of pressuring the EFCL through contract, and when that failed, they would have sought judgment in the courts. And payments were still held back and not dealt with. So I would say that after 2018, 2019, that committee that was sanctioned by the Prime Minister sort of fizzled out. And then contractors and consultants and other service providers got pretty alarmed, and a lot of people started to take their matters to court and got proper judgments. Now, with that judgment, here is the court saying to the entity, and mind you, this entity is formed by the government for the purposes of the government, and the government has chosen not to pay or to respect the judgment of the court, but instead wind up the company, which jeopardizes the amount that people can get, those who even have judgments.
So, and that's the dangerous precedent you're seeing. So that because just within days of a decision in the court in which the company was ordered to pay one of these constructors, Emily Elias companies, was it a set of millions of dollars? This decision came down that the company should be closed down. So you're saying that there are implications as to whether that court order would be obeyed, and if it is, whether or not what the court ordered would be the amount paid?
Okay, so first of all, I'll be very clear, right? I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer.
Yes.
However, my
Probably the next best
understanding
thing.
is that under the Companies Act, when a company is wound up, the person that sees about all of this has to pay all of the debt, and that is so. It depends now on what is deemed to be the asset value of the company, which essentially all of us know that EFCL has no assets.
Right.
So it comes back down to going back to, for want of a better word, implore, beg the government to provide funds to pay off these debts.
So Mr. Elias will have to negotiate with somebody in the government to get at least some portion of the court award here. He cannot expect in these circumstances to get what the court has ordered, right? Is that
my understanding, again, I'm not a lawyer, right? But my understanding is it's all now in the liquidator's hands. So the liquidator has a job to do, which is prescribed in the Companies Act. So there will be a situation where the liquidator will publish in the Gazette, I think, a call for all or everyone who believes themselves to be a creditor to the EFCL. And then the liquidator will determine, of course, my understanding again is that persons with court judgments that is not contestable by the liquidator. Where we have sort of dissonance is with respect to how does the government eventually treat the total amount that is outstanding, because the EFCL has no tangible asset. So the only place money could come from is from the government. But because they chose to wind up the company, this is all now in the liquidator's hands.
Yes, I think that case was, I can't remember the figure, but 17 million or something like that in that court award. But you say here in the second paragraph of this letter that the company owes well over $600 million to its creditors, of which the majority comprises monies owed to contractors and consultants, and most of it goes back as far as 2015. Yeah?
Yes. So I will tell you that we have been involved at the level of the JCC in looking at these debts. So we do have an idea of the order of magnitude. So that is the order of magnitude as far as I understand. Right now we are trying to get all the details of that in terms of how many people has judgments and what does that value amount to. It's a significant amount of money. However, there would be creditors who chose not to go to the courts for whatever reason. They may not have had the cash flow, because imagine you're not being paid millions of dollars over a period of time. And this, as you are aware, goes on in other SPCs as well. So when one is running a business, your first priority is to pay staff salaries before you start to pay lawyers, especially when there is a history of these things being dragged out in court. And for those who would have gone on and gotten judgments, I'm telling you that it would have costed them a lot of money. So there would be some companies that may have chosen not to go, but would have done other things like continue to write to EFCL to keep their claim, so to speak, alive. And I want to make a little segue here in terms of claim. Sometimes the government uses the word claim, but in the industry, a claim is something that you ask for. we are really talking about certified monies to be paid. We understand that claims are not going to be considered at this stage. So some people would have gone to EFCL and gotten letters, for instance, as late as last year, that certifies that this amount of money is owed, and these would have been passed on to the Ministry of Education, who then has to legitimize it, sign off on it, and pass it to the Minister of Finance to pay. And so we have all of that as well. So that number, 600 million, includes both judgments and legitimate valuations and certifications made by EFCL for work deemed to be complete.
Right. So that from many angles here, a lot of people are going to have to, well, almost suck salt. They're going to take what they get out of what they are owed. And it seems as though this company never operated to meet its mandate. And it's a company that was created by a previous P&M administration, was shut down by a successive P&M administration. There was a discussion some months ago on corporate governance by the Corporate Governance Institute at the Lockjack Graduate School. And one of those persons who spoke was a retired permanent secretary, Ali Makomi, and she talked a lot about, in discussions that I had with her subsequent to that, about what she saw as deep weaknesses in the operation of this very company. So it never met its mandate, in a real sense, would you say?
I would just want to correct one thing. I do believe that the EFCL was formed by the Patrick Manning administration.
Yes.
And then went on in subsequent administrations. I do believe that they were executing works with respect to repairs, and there were several contracts with respect to new schools and refurbishments and the early childhood centers. A number of them were done. So part of the whole argument is that the government, and in particular the Ministry of Education, has beneficial use of these facilities. Either they be refurbished, repaired, or new facilities like the Early Childhood Care Centers, ECCC. And several were done over the period from the time the FCL was formed until it was closed very recently. So the industry is saying that the industry needs to be paid fairly for what has been provided and what is being used in terms of beneficial use. That's a basic tenet in law as far as I know in contract here. And it's an argument that we make a lot as engineers when we're dealing with contracts. So yes, there is value that was done. So that is how I would answer that. There was value created and beneficial use subsequently. So payments need to be made.
All right, this is just one episode in a wider discussion we probably should be having on this issue. But Mr. Khan, thank you very much for talking with us on this.
You're welcome. Take care.
Thank you very much, Fazir Khan, President of the Joint Consultative Council for the Construction Industry in Trinidad and Tobago. As we head up to the news at 7, we take a quick look around the region. We go to St. Vincent, where the Minister of Health was talking about a situation involving sanitation workers in that country, St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Health Minister Sinclair Jimmy Prince today acknowledged that there was an administrative oversight in sanitation workers being listed among frontline and other essential workers who were required to take the COVID-19 vaccines as part of the government's vaccination mandate, which took effect last year. His comments come in light of a memo written on February 23rd and made public today, in which the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health informed the Chief Environmental Health Officer that based on instructions given to the ministry, all permanent sanitation workers who are presently off the job, having not taken the COVID-19 vaccine, and are willing to return to work shall be allowed to do so without the vaccine. Minister Prince told SVG TV News in a telephone interview that the error was recently identified and as such, the memo was sent out.
There was an administrative error with respect to the sanitation workers. They were classified as frontline workers when they were not supposed to be under the law. We recently recognized the error and we instructed the PS and the environmental health officer to correct that error. They have done so. They are going to reinstate the workers, and of course, we will have to pay them for the time that they were off. Those sanitation workers that were asked, who resigned because they didn't take the vaccine, they're not supposed to be on the frontline workers list. We didn't think that the law covered them as frontline workers because of the kind of work they do. So therefore, now that we found out to be correcting it.
Minister Prince said the sanitation workers who are off the job for not taking the vaccines since the mandate came into effect will have to be compensated.
Well, they'll be paid. Listen, let's just put it that way. They will be paid for the time that they were off. That is just the only left out of pocket. Of course, we'll have to compensate them in that sense.
Commenting on the latest development, President of the Public Service Union, Elroy Boucher, called on the government to do the right thing and right their historical wrong without waiting on the court to decide on the legal challenge against its vaccination mandate. Boucher told SVG TV News that, like the sanitation workers, the same courtesy should be extended to all government employees who lost their jobs and accrued benefits for failing to take the COVID-19 vaccine.
And it's a good move on the part of the government, and that is what should be happening to all dismissed workers, not just those at the sanitation. And we have the nurses, all the other civil servants, those at the customs, teachers, all of them should be recalled, sent back to their job with their full benefit. It is a call that we made when we wrote the government and asked them to undo this historic wrong. It is a wrong against workers. It's an injustice. And we urge the government, don't wait until the court make a decision, which we know is going to be in our favor. Do the right thing and give all of those dismissed workers back their jobs, just like what is happening now.
All right, so we have the news to 7 o'clock. On the other side of that, Barry Padarath responding to some of the comments by the Minister of Public Utilities, particularly as they relate to the continuing operations of the Water and Sewage Authority. So stay with us.
Seven is out, all day is in. WESN News on the hour.
In this season, we talk more about health, wellness, and everything in between. I am so excited to share with you everything about health and wellness so that you can design the life that you've always dreamed of. Join me here on What's Up Doc.
What's Up Doc, Tuesdays and Thursdays here on WESN, Content Capital.
Burning questions, urgent topics. Welcome back to One on One, the show where we tackle the most current and pertinent subjects that are affecting all citizens, where we ask the hard questions and have in-depth conversations. What separates One on One from other talk shows is that the conversation stems from a younger perspective on topics that affect the fabric of our society. One on One, Wednesdays at 10 a.m. on WESN, Content Capital.
Let your voice be heard. Call Madam Fix It on WESN, the only place that effectively helps you with your woes. Having problems getting onto government agencies, water woes, NIS and pension problems, potholes, and much, much more. Call me, Madam Fix It, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right here on WESN. Let me fix it for you.
Every day, we communicate through stories. Stories of ourselves, our challenges, our goals, our experiences, and our aspirations. Storytelling is an art that we have mastered. WESN Film Studios comprises a collaborative team of experts with extensive industry experience locally, regionally, and internationally. The ability of your business to successfully communicate with your preferred audience depends on the strength of the stories you tell. Your vision should be communicated in a high-quality, professional, and creative way. From concept to post-production, advertising to film, multi-camera productions, live events, streaming, and virtual conferencing, we are WESN Film Studio. Let your own unique voice be heard and your vision realized. Call us today at 628-5835 for your next production.
People really want to know, what about me? Where do I fit? Yes. What is in the ride for me in terms of a better Trinidad and Tobago? And I'm pleased to shed some light on that.
The purpose of bail is to ensure your attendance at court. That's it. It is not punitive, it is not rehabilitative.
We, the police officers, we are professional, and we are here for whenever the survivor is ready to come forward.
We have the right to private and family life, the right to religious freedoms and beliefs and thoughts and expression. But these rights are not absolute. Certain rights can be limited.
The law is to govern the whole, it's for all of us in public.
The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you, what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through? Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. Okay, this has been 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
It may seem like the hardest thing to do right now, but we all need each other to wear a mask, wash our hands, watch our physical distance, and stay at home. We need you safe. Together we can make the difference. Together we can curb the spread of COVID-19. So let's be responsible in our actions. The Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross Society. Mission-based, people-focused, community-driven.
Welcome back. It's 7:07 in the morning on this Thursday. Let's just give you a time check as we head back into the discussions on the program. Well, let me just read a little bit of something coming into my inbox here late yesterday. It says, the Shadow Minister for Public Utilities in the opposition, MP Barry Padarat, said the government's announcements of a modulated water treatment plant is like spinning top in mud. He said he accused the Minister of Public Utilities, Marvin Gonzalez, of making that statement. Mr. Padarat has slammed the minister's announcement of government's intention to establish several modulated water treatment plants in the country. He indicated that the establishment of such plants is like spinning top in mud since it deals only with production and not distribution. And the statement goes on some more. Mr. Padarat is our guest. Now, we're talking specifically, well, he's agreed to come and talk about some of what the minister said in that conversation with the Prime Minister 2 nights ago about the situation regarding the Water and Sewerage Authority. You know, he's on top of this plan to change things with the Water and Sewage Authority. There was a new plan to be put in place. Somebody was appointed to head that, and that person, had some difficulty with communicating and on matters taking place at the authority on that basis. And he, resigned from the position in a situation which I was central to that. But that is sort of on the side at the moment. The minister made these announcements as he sat next to the Prime Minister about what looks down the pike for the Water and Sewage Authority, and talking about the need for the authority to go before the Regulated Industries Commission. But he says that they have to do some things before they get there. Mr. Pedarath has agreed to talk with us on it. And let me just say that we reached out to the minister. I reached out to the minister yesterday. I sent him 2 notes asking if he would come and expand some of what he said in that conversation. He read them, because you could know when somebody reads your WhatsApp notes, but he didn't respond. Let's just put that there. Mr. Pedarath has agreed to talk with us about how he sees things from his angle. Good morning, Barry. Good to see you.
Hi, good morning, Andy, and good morning to your viewers.
All right. So you want to start, summing up a little bit of what you said about what the minister said concerning these are modulated, what you call them, this facility for modulated water treatment plants?
Certainly, Andy. Over the past year in particular, the government has been telegraphing to the population all the woes associated with WASA and the challenges that citizens have for a reliable supply of potable water in their taps. Last evening, the minister would have sat with the Prime Minister and announced the modulated water treatment plants that are to come on stream. The minister has given the first one a deadline of October. But the minister seems to be only telling half of the story, because the challenges at WASA does not only have to do with production, it also has to do with distribution. And the distribution part is what seems to be affecting most of the people of our country in terms of not being able to get a reliable supply of water, particularly in South and Central Trinidad. The minister addressed that in particular. The minister indicated that the first water treatment plant will be commissioned for use in Central Trinidad. And me coming from a constituency in Central Trinidad and representing a constituency in South Trinidad that has tremendous issues as it relates to water and a reliable supply of water, one would know that the main challenges, at least 50 to 60% of the challenges associated with WASA, does not necessarily have to do with production. It has to do with distribution. We have an infrastructure in this country that is over 80 and 90 years old. We have rotting pipelines, we have dilapidated infrastructure, we have poor administration. So for the minister to indicate to the population that the modulated water treatment plants would alleviate the woes that we are seeing is really disingenuous this morning for the minister to say that. Secondly, the minister is not saying at what cost are these water treatment plants coming to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And I've also called for the minister to put the terms and conditions. We have seen in the past where this government have entered into memorandums of understanding with foreign entities. In the minister's conversation, the minister did not indicate whether or not these entities are private sector entities in Canada or whether these are public sector entities. And those bits of information are very important as it relates to the cost, as it relates to the terms and conditions, because these will ultimately be passed on to the consumer. So I don't see in the short term or the long term any positive impact these modulated water treatment plants would have if the challenges at WASA in terms of the distribution part of it is not addressed. I also noticed that the minister sought to throw WASA under the bus, and I've been saying that the minister continues to exhibit what I call bipolar behavior, because this is the same minister who in one breath praises WASA and praises the performance of WASA, and then comes and tells us on the other side of his mouth that WASA is lying to the government, WASA is not telling the truth in terms of the status of the company, etc. When this government is responsible for putting the chairman and the board of directors in place, they are the hand-selected persons of the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago who sit as the chairman and the board of WASA. So it's really mixed signals. I'm not sure the minister is really competent for this type of job. I'm not sure if that is the reason why the minister continues to duck and run from these interviews, but it really raises more questions than answers as it relates to the public utilities sector, and more particularly water sector in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, and he keeps talking about staffing. You know, he made this point about in the previous government, and they like to refer to the government as the UNC government. It was in fact a five-party coalition called the government had the name, the People's Partnership, but for whatever reason they like to refer to it as the UNC government. He said that the UNC government, that last government, had a plan, and he talked about Ganga Singh, who, when he was CEO, had gone to the IDB to look for funding, and he produced this document which said that the authority was going to retrench, I think it was 2,500 people, he said, but that never happened. And he talks about reducing staff, and the Prime Minister immediately upon him said, well, you know, the question is, if people are there to perform a job, they should be performing that job. But he continues to talk about reducing staff, and he talked about this question of going to the Regulated Industries Commission. He said that they have to, the commission, well, WASA will have to prove its case. But the sense is that come hell or high water, water rates are going to go up. I want to respond to that, but also the question of this restructuring and this drive for greater efficiency that he has come up with this idea. And we don't know what the details are in that, even at this point, almost 2 years into it.
And the Cabinet Subcommittee report, you would recall that about a year and a half, the Prime Minister had mandated the Cabinet Subcommittee to look at restructuring WASA. That report is now a public document, having been laid in the Parliament over 1 year now. I'm a part of the Joint Select Committee who has been mandated to look at that Cabinet Subcommittee report. That Cabinet Subcommittee report, which is a public document, says some of the challenges that WASA is facing that needs to be addressed in terms of restructuring. One of those challenges is the issue of staffing. You would recall, and probably the minister is young and new to the scene, but the issue of staffing at WASA did not arise coming out of the People's Partnership government. In 2005, Prime Minister then, Mr. Manning, at a public meeting in Paris Suites, said to the population of Trinidad and Tobago that WASA was a $27 billion headache. And that was the headlines that rang out that day. It was not a $27 million headache that the Prime Minister then said. He said it was a $27 billion headache. And a lot of that had to do with, one, the aging infrastructure, but two, the issue of employees at WASA having escalated from Prime Minister Pandey's time of just over 1,500 people to a People's National Movement government in 2005-2006, moving to close to 5,000 employees. And Prime Minister Rowley today appears as though he's surprised by these numbers. But that Prime Minister sat in the very cabinet of Prime Minister Manning and would have made some of those decisions, would have been aware of these challenges at WASA and said nothing. So for the Prime Minister to come and cast that blame together with the Minister of Public Utilities on the People's Partnership is really playing smart with foolishness. The Prime Minister is very much aware that the staffing at WASA ballooned to 5,000 employees by 2005-2006. The challenges that the Kamla Persad-Bissessar administration met in 2010, part of that challenge was the staffing at WASA. And instead of subcontracting a lot of the work that WASA was doing at that time, we moved water production in this country under Kamla Persad-Bissessar administration from 35%, where we met it in 2010, to 72% by the time Minister Ganga Singh came back into the cabinet around 2012. And a lot of that had to do with the staffing at WASA, that we were able to utilize a lot of the staff there at that time to get the job done. So really it is an issue of management. This minister in particular, Marvin Gonzalez, all he has been doing since he's gotten into office is complaining, speaking about this Cabinet Subcommittee report, speaking about restructuring. But almost 2 years have gone into this administration, the second term of Prime Minister Rowley, and we are still at the position of a Cabinet Subcommittee report without any outcome from that report or any substantial work being done. So there's a lot of talk coming from the minister, but very little action and follow-up. As I said, we are into the second year of their second administration. Almost 7 years have passed. the challenges of WASA continue to remain. So by announcing these water treatment plants are not really going to remove the problems of WASA, but essentially what it's going to do is exacerbate a lot of the problems. It is a ruse, it is an attempt to put in the minds of the population that, hey, the distribution of water, the production of water is going to increase over the next few years so that the population will be able to have a more palatable approach to the RIC in terms of the increases that are coming. But in truth and in fact, what is going to happen is that these are just going to be grand announcements. The cost is going to be passed on to the consumer as it relates to the cost of these water treatment plants, but the service and the supply of water is not going to have any significant improvement. As it relates to the issue of the Regulated Industries Commission and the impending water rates, there's a three-pronged approach in terms of what the RIC is mandated to do by law before any increase can occur to be passed on to the consumer. First, WASA has to send to the RIC a report and a recommendation and justify that report and that recommendation for water increase. Secondly, when the RIC gets the report, the RIC must do their due diligence, call in all stakeholders, interrogate the report, make their findings. And the third thing would be for them to hold these public consultations for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to put forward their case as to why there should or should not be an increase passed on to the consumer as it relates to higher water rates. We are now at the first prong of the approach. We still have two more to go. And based on what is placed in the public domain at this point, there is very little to justify to the RIC why there should be an increase, because the RIC must look to see whether or not these modulated water treatment plants will have a positive impact on the water sector in Trinidad and Tobago. And as far as one can see, these modulated water treatment plants are not going to be the panacea to the problem when you still have 50% of the problem being the distribution with poor infrastructure, dilapidated, rotting pipelines that they have not changed in 80, 90 years. So a lot of these challenges are going to remain. The population, as well as the commercial customers, those from the industrial estates, those who use a lot of water in terms of their manufacturing sector, will have the opportunity to put forward their case as well. So we are a long way off in terms of any sort of cost being added to the consumer in terms of price hikes going forward for water in this country.
Why? But is it not a kind of chicken and egg situation that WASA will say, well, look, we need increased revenues to be able to fix these things. If we don't get them, we don't get fixed, and we're stuck there. So to what extent the commission will then have to consider if they're being starved of funds based on what they collect from customers in order to improve the system, then they have to carry up the rates. So it's going to be tough going, you would say.
Well, if you look at the law that regulates the Regulated Industries Commission, the RIC, that determines these increase in utility sector, what the law says is that there must be, coming from the RIC, from WASA, TNTEC, even TSCT, a justification in terms of a reliable supply in order for there to be any impending hikes. So while I do understand your concern about the chicken and egg situation as you've described it, we also have to look at government's actions in terms of what they have done to companies like WASA, TSCT, and TNTEC. Just this last year, in the last financial appropriation bill that was brought to the Parliament, also known as the budget statement, WASA has been cut in terms of material and supply and labor of $350 million. Annually, what we have been seeing happening in an attempt to demonize WASA, government has been cutting funding of WASA in a very significant way and in very significant areas. Last year, I raised this issue in particular because with a company like WASA cutting $350 million, particularly in the areas of material and supply, which would deal with these aging infrastructure, but would also deal with manpower. it was startling to see that government was cutting these areas. And it really places WASA in a precarious situation because, one, it affects the supply to customers, and two, it continues to exacerbate the problems of aging infrastructure and the challenges of infrastructure at WASA. So there are clear attempts by government to either, one, privatize the water sector in this country, or two, to run WASA into the ground, so much so that it justifies opening up a new company and cutting off the debt of WASA in terms of it not being passed on to the state.
That's a sense that at least you all have, that is probably the latent intention of the government?
Well, if we were to take the Petrotrin playbook, which we are seeing happening in other public utilities companies, for instance, TSCT, that's happening to right now. TNTech has on its books a $4 billion debt. And the challenges at these state companies continue to be compounded by the lack of support coming from government and the opening up of new companies or new entities. And also we are seeing just a few days ago that Cabinet has established a subcommittee to look into the woes at TSCT. So the playbook is very, very similar coming out of Petrotrin, going into WASA, going into TSCT, going into TNTech, that really sets the stage for privatization. Just a few days ago when Minister Young announced the TSCT subcommittee coming out of the Cabinet, the minister, when asked frontally by journalists at the post-Cabinet briefing, the minister was asked whether or not there were attempts by the government or intentions of the government to privatize TSCT. The minister said at that point that they were far from that, but he didn't rule out privatization. When 1 month ago, the Minister of Public Utilities told us that it was not government's intention, that he was categorically denying privatization. So there are mixed signals coming from the government. But Minister Young seems to be much more in the know than Minister Marvin Gonzalez. Minister Young has been in government from 2015. Minister Young has been a central figure in the decisions that government has been making, particularly as it relates to some of these private sector companies. So I would want to rely more on the utterances of Minister Young, especially in light of what we have seen coming out of Petrotrin and coming out of TSCT. I believe a similar fate will end up with WASA and also TNTech, who has a $4 billion debt. And I just want to make one more point as it would relate to TNTech.
Go ahead.
We are going to see a similar situation, as I've said, happening like that of TSCT, happening to WASA and TNTech. When we were told that TNTech has a $4 billion debt and is in bankruptcy, I asked the question and I've placed it in the public domain, and yet it has still not been answered. NGC provides natural gas to TSCT, to TNTech, sorry. However, for electricity production. However, those prices in terms of what NGC sells TNTech for the production of electricity, those prices are not fixed by NGC. Those prices are fixed by the Cabinet through the Energy Subcommittee of Cabinet. I've been asking, and the minister has been ducking and running from this question. He has not answered it, but the question is not going to go away. What price has the Cabinet fixed in terms of the supply of natural gas going to TNTech? Has the Cabinet increased its pricing as it relates to the natural gas coming out of NGC going to TNTech?
Right.
Because what will also happen is that if Cabinet has increased the price of natural gas being purchased by TNTech coming from NGC, then you're also going to see that once water rates are going up, you're also going to see electricity rates going up. And I'm told that that information has already been supplied to the RIC ahead of the report coming out of WASA. So we may see electricity rates going up much sooner in the immediate future than water rates, because the water rates issue has a substantially long way to go in terms of the process.
Right.
But the RIC seems to already have the information as it relates to the gas prices that government have fixed to be sold to TNTech. and that cost will be passed on to the consumer in a very short term.
A very short term.
And we will, as I said, we will see it passing on to the consumers.
All right.
shortly.
Well, what you said there about the relative importance of Mr. Young, I think Minister Young, I think it's still a smack bang, because I think the Prime Minister described him as his MVP in the cabinet. His most valuable player, his all-rounder, and so on. So that's what's coming out there. So he will be privy to much more than probably the rest of the team. But I just wanted to share with you also, in discussing the situation over WASA and preparation for this discussion post the conversation with the people 2 nights ago, I was told by somebody who's in the know that Minister in the office of the Minister of Finance, Brian Manning, he has been deputized to meet with trade unions to bring them up to speed on what the government may intend, particularly with the Water and Sewerage Authority. Not sure if you all have any intelligence of that, but I just put that out there. We'll probably come back to that as we go forward on these issues. But thank you very much for talking with us on this, Mr. Padaris, Barry Padaris, the Member of Parliament for Princestown and the Shadow Minister of Public Utilities in the opposition. As we coming to wrap the program up, let's just show you what's on the front pages of these newspapers, our partners in the business here. Newsday, just the same headlines in the 3 papers, if I were to tell you that. So that's the Newsday front page, and that's the Newsday back page this morning. There's Newsday Trinidad and Tobago. In the Newsday Tobago, this is what they're saying on the front, and it's what they're saying on the back. That takes care of that. Well, we just want to say at this point, well, that's our broadcast for today. We tell you, as always, you can stay with us here at AM Prime at WESNCC on all the social media platforms, and you can send your emails to amprime@wesncc.com. That will do it for us for this morning. But of course, we tell you there's news at the top of the hour, followed by today's edition of Talking Point with Shah and Small and their guests. So I'm Andy Johnson for now. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.